Before we get to today's episode of 5 on the Floor, make sure you check out one of the great sponsors of this podcast and the other podcasts in the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is AutoNation. They're the largest auto retailer from coast to coast, and their friendly and knowledgeable staff here in South Florida will help you save big on a huge selection of new cars, trucks, and SUVs. Toyota, Honda, Chevrolet, Mercedes-Benz, and much more. And if you're looking to buy pre-owned, shop AutoNation's huge selection of one-price pre-owned vehicles, all clearly marked with one price, the lowest price guaranteed. Or if you just want to get rid of that old car, turn it into cash today, get a top dollar offer and a check the same day. They'll buy your car with no purchase necessary. Your check engine light on right now. Get the services you need at low AutoNation prices, oil changes, tires, batteries, and more, all for less. Call or visit AutoNation.com to schedule your appointment today. All right, but here's the thing. I used to say that a lot. If you're in the market for a new car, make sure you DM me at 5 Reasons Sports on Twitter. That's the number 5 Reasons Sports. I will give an AutoNation senior manager your information, with your permission, so they can reach out to you directly and walk you through the buying process. So no waiting online, no getting lost in the sauce or any of that stuff. An AutoNation senior manager will reach out to you directly. And now, on to today's episode.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a Miami Heat and NBA podcast from Ethan Skolnick with Alphonse Sidney, a.k.a. Alf954. Brought to you by the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 on the Floor podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick. This is usually where I say here as usual with Alf Sidney, but no Alf today. He actually has a real job, so he had to work. You can find him at Alf954. Check out our last episode where we were so bored for content because we put it out on August 15th, which I consider the absolute dead spot of the NBA schedule because it's a month after free agency is basically ended, and it's a month before training camps open. So we actually, Howard, and I'll introduce my next guest in a second, we actually spent 25 minutes debating NBA2K's All-Decade Teams. That's what we did. So I'm going to engage you on that after I introduce you, but I'm not going to engage you for 25 minutes. Make sure you check out the other podcasts in our network. It's really easy. We now have 14 others. All you got to do is type in 5 Reasons Sports in your favorite podcast provider, whether it's Spotify, Podbean, Pocket Cast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, whatever it is you listen to us on. Make sure you hit 5 Reasons Sports. Latest 3 yards per carry, of course, the Dolphins, as we speak, although you probably won't hear this until after it, playing their second preseason game. Fish Tank did their first training camp episode with Alan Hearns and a bunch of other current Dolphins this week. Also, check out Smart Q Territory on wrestling. Out for the Count on boxing, we added Alex Dono to that podcast, so make sure you check out that as well. Obviously, Alex is a specialist in MMA, so we're adding that to our menu. But today, I'm going to talk to an old colleague of mine. Well, he's not old. He's older than me. An old colleague of mine from Bleacher Report. He's still at Bleacher Report, about to head on vacation as we speak. The great Howard Beck. You can find him, of course, very simply on Twitter at Howard Beck. And it's good to have you with me, Howard.
Ethan, my friend. It's been too long. Thanks for having me.
It has been. It has been too long. Maybe we'll have you on again pretty soon. I had a couple of our mutual friends on lately, Vinny Goodwill, Candace Buckner, who basically doused Heat fans with some reality about Bradley Beal, so she won't be back. But she gave me a big, Candace, she gave me a big wah-wah about the Bradley Beal thing. I said, when he's traded here, when he's traded here, I will be playing that back on all of the podcasts. So I'll get to that.
Love it.
Also. All right, so I'm going to engage you with it on this for a minute just because we did this for a little while. Obviously, you've covered the NBA for a while, covered the Lakers, covered, unfortunately for you, the Knicks, and now cover the general NBA. But these NBA2K teams that they put out, these all-decade teams, like most people didn't really have a problem with the 80s, I don't think. I don't know if – did you see them, by the way? Did they cross your timeline?
They did not. Like, I saw that there was chatter about this, and that NBA TV, I think, was tweeting about it too. And but I missed the entire list. So I have no idea. Whatever people are outraged about, and I can rest assured that they are, because they always are, I'm not sure which outrages are the most important ones right now. So you can fill me in.
Well, there's only one outrage that matters down here, and it involves number 3 always. But let's go to sorry, right. But I'm going to go to something else. Okay, so the team in the 80s, I'm trying to call it up as we speak. Right, the team in the 80s. I mean, pretty simple to kind of figure out. You know, what a couple of them it might be. I mean, we've got Magic Johnson, obviously. We have Michael Jordan in the backcourt. I think you and I can agree on that. That's pretty good. I mean, we're not going to have any argument on that.
Good place to start.
Good place to start. All right, so we're kind of got, and then Larry Bird at one forward. The other two positions there was some controversy about, which was at the other forward spot, it was Kevin McHale, and at the center spot, it was Moses Malone. Would you like to interject with anybody else?
This is the 80s.
Yes.
And Kareem is not the center?
So you'd like to interject with somebody else? Yes. That one jumped out, right?
Yeah. That's interesting choice. Was this based on some algorithm as opposed to like people?
I don't know. It was based on, I think, whatever Ronnie 2K decided, Howard. I think some of us know Ronnie 2K because you get that message every year. Can we use your Twitter account at our game? Sure. What am I getting paid for that? Nothing.
Nothing. Yeah. So which is why I've never been in that game, because I've said I don't.
And I have, because I'll take any publicity I can get, Howard. But anyway, so good or bad. So Moses Malone and Kevin McHale. So you mentioned an obvious other one. I guess the thing with Kareem is that he wasn't still in his prime. But I mean, they did go to 5 finals in that decade. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean they were a dynasty, and they were I don't want to say they were the defining team of the decade, because then the Celtics fans get all bent out of shape. The Celtics and Lakers were the co-teams of that decade at minimum. Pat Riley will disagree with that assessment. But it's Kareem. And at least a big chunk of that, Kareem is still Kareem.
Right.
So I don't see any way where a guy who's in the GOAT discussion and still has a bunch of great years in the time span that we're talking about somehow takes a back seat at his position. And that's all due respect to Moses Malone, but come on.
Well, I almost feel like they felt like they need to throw a sixer on there, and I think they could have done that at the other forward spot, right? Like, I mean, couldn't you have put Dr. J there instead of Kevin McHale?
Sure. Yeah. I think Laker fans might lobby for James Worthy.
Right. We mentioned him too.
Yeah. Wow. Barkley could be in there, right?
Yeah, I guess he was drafted in '84, right? So I mean, he wasn't on that '83 team that won the championship. It feels like they wanted to stick somebody in there from the '83 Sixers, and I'm just wondering, if you're going to do that, why not pick the guy who actually changed culture in some ways? Right? I mean, is Dr. J higher on the all-time list at his respective position than Moses would be at his?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I don't know how to break that one down. I think that the issue really more is this, that as we do with all of these things, because we've picked arbitrary endpoints, you point out, okay, well, Barkley drafted in '84, so he's missed, a few key years of the '80s. Well, that's why this is flawed from the beginning. If you're going to be strictly about that, then, well, was he one of the greatest players of that decade? Yeah, of course he was. Are we docking him for not being drafted until '84? Well, it gets weird. It gets weird in a hurry because of the arbitrary endpoints. And that's the same thing with the Kareem thing, where it's like, well, he entered the decade as one of the greatest of all time and still was at the end, but he just wasn't in his prime anymore. So I don't know. Anyway, this is exactly why people make these lists, so that they can get all the publicity out of us debating it.
So I can bother you with it. All right. So the '90s, okay. Akeem at center, we're not going to argue about that, right? Like we feel good about that one. Akeem in the '90s.
Yeah, I mean, I guess somebody might make a case for Shaq. Again, we have fewer years, not drafted till '92, so misses a couple of years there, and loses to Akeem in the finals, and Akeem wins 2 championships in there.
See, to me, that's the thing, right? So the other guys in there would be David Robinson or Shaq, and Akeem head to head on them, pretty much handled in that decade, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yep, I'm there. Yep.
All right. So the forward spots, you mentioned Barkley before, but I don't have a problem with the guys they picked. Karl Malone and Scottie Pippen.
Yeah, really, really hard to argue that one. I mean, Malone versus Barkley is one of those age-old, debates. Sometimes I think it's just a matter of preference or personality or I think it's hard to parse out with those two guys, and Scotty has to be on that team. Has to be.
Agreed. And Michael and Stockton, which I don't have a problem with either of those either. I mean, I guess
Michael's the obvious no-brainer.
Well, yeah, right. But even Stockton, I just, when you look at, I mean, yeah, there are other choices. Clyde Drexler. There's other names you could come up with during that. Reggie Miller, could be in the conversation, I guess. But I just think, I mean, you're talking about the all-time assists and steals leader and a guy who went to the finals twice as one of the two best players on his team.
Yeah. Is Isaiah retired too soon to be in there?
See, I think that you're right, though. The thing with Isaiah is, again, he straddles decades, right? So you could, like, he's late 80s, right? And then he's kind of early 90s. So, but you can't put him on the 80s team because you've got Magic and Michael. And and plus, then, Michael wouldn't talk to him either. And that, that'd be a problem on the team. But the 90s, I still think it's Stockton because you just look at the totality of the decade. I think it's up. All right, I'm going to get to the one that everybody's arguing about down here, okay?
Right.
The 2000s, all right? Shaq, fine, okay? Yes. At center. Duncan at one forward, LeBron at the other forward. Anybody argues any of that, they're idiots, okay? That's fine. That front court is set. Kobe at one guard. Okay, the other guard that they chose, and I'm not going to try to poison you with this on any of this because I think there's a choice better than the one people think down here, possibly. The other guy they chose was Iverson.
I could have predicted that, yeah.
And who would first come to your mind in the 2000s? It doesn't have to be a point guard, playing next to Kobe.
Yeah, and obviously they're going by position, or they're not going specific, right? Like they're not insisting on point guards; they're just going guards, forward, center.
Center, forward, guard. Yes.
Yeah, this is one of those tricky things. So Iverson is beloved and idolized, and for great reasons that go well beyond just skills as a basketball player, right? People love his heart. People love that he, was great despite being diminutive, we could say. And so people always bring in that whole pound for pound thing, which I hate that phrase. Actually, now I know how I should respond to that Twitter thing about which phrase would you eliminate from the NBA. It doesn't apply as much today, but I would eliminate pound for pound. Pound for pound is grading on a curve. When you say Iverson is the greatest pound for pound, what you're saying is if only he were a little bit bigger,
right? But
because he's smaller, we're going to give him extra credit. And that's how we're going to elevate him in the discussion. Well, that's dumb. I mean, the NBA is a big man's game, or was for a long time. Is now I don't know what it is. Now it's a mutant's game. Now it's like if you're 6'10" with ball handling and shooting skills, or 7 feet. But the idea that pound for pound he's the best something or other, what it means is you're grading on a curve. You're saying we need to give him extra credit because he's small, and we're extra impressed by him being able to do things at that height. And if only he had 4 more inches on him, he would have been really, really good. Well, that doesn't make up for the fact that he, was a volume shooter who shot at a very low efficiency. And I know we didn't talk about efficiency in the same way back during his time as we do now in the analytics era, but it doesn't make it any less important or significant to the game. He was awesome, but he didn't achieve that much. And, yes, he carried a team to the finals that a lot of people thought was, this great achievement of carrying them. But look at who he had. He had all these guys who perfectly complemented him, who didn't need the ball, who weren't going to demand it, and who played defense and did all the other things that he was not going to do. Dwayne Wade's a better player, period. I mean, I'm not saying that to pander to South Florida. I'm saying that because my own my own value system in evaluating players, even when we were in that pre-analytics era, and I was covering Kobe, and there was a whole Kobe versus AI thing because they were natural rivals, same draft class. Kobe largely grew up in Philly. Iverson playing in Philly, and they were playing the same position more or less. And I always thought, man, Kobe gets dinged for some of the shots he takes, and it was mostly because, well, you should have just passed to Shaq instead. Iverson got a complete free pass. It was like, well, who's he supposed to pass to? Which, again, always the easy way out for people cheating on that argument. Kobe was a better player, but there were years there where people argued for Iverson. I don't think anybody would now, but they did then. And so I always kind of looked at Iverson as being a little bit too flawed for the lofty stature that he occupied. Again, doesn't mean he's not a Hall of Famer. Doesn't mean he's not great. Doesn't mean he's not amazing. Doesn't mean that he wasn't phenomenal to watch. Doesn't mean that he wasn't a really important cultural icon for the NBA in so many ways. Again, that were off the court, but he's not as good as effective of a guard, in part because of his size. Sorry, pound for pound people, I'm throwing that out. Dwayne Wade, with his extra 4.5 inches or whatever on him, and also just with his shot selection and overall effectiveness, and his passing, was a better player.
I agree with you on that, and obviously I'm not going to disagree with that with my audience. But I actually don't think either of them should be the other guard on the 2000s team.
Whoa!
Yeah, well, and I definitely don't think it should be Iverson. Although, again, the knock against Dwayne in the 2000s is that Iverson was averaged 30 for 3 seasons before Dwayne even entered the league in that decade. And so
Yeah.
I think that again, this is part of just a timing issue. But the guy that I would probably put there is Nash. I think he won both of his MVPs during that decade.
Yeah.
Obviously, after he turned 30, he had the number 1 offense in the league 6 times in that decade, whether it was with Dallas or with Phoenix. He was a system. I know he didn't win a title. They might have if Diaw and Stoudemire don't come off the bench. And, he basically, brought sort of D'Antoni's system to its full flourish, which we haven't seen since because, he tried to do it with Chris Duhon and Jeremy Lin. And, now it's just hand the ball to Harden and get out of the way. Right. But to me, the other 2 options here are Kidd or Nash. And I was just going to say Kidd. Yeah. Yeah, they're the other 2 options, and when I pulled it down here, it's 81% Dwayne. But again, I think that what happens here, again, it's biased, but it's also, because I believe that Dwayne was the most complete player of any of those 4. I think you can make a case for Kidd in his prime, possibly. Nash, obviously, defensively was nowhere close, and neither was Allen. Okay, in terms of who he could actually guard, because you could put Dwayne on a small forward, you couldn't put Allen on a big 2 guard. Okay, and that, like you said,
No.
that's why the pound for pound thing is, I agree with you, ridiculous. But I think you can make a case. I like people are making the argument for Dwayne down here, but I think you make a case for Nash. I mean, they were, a team that won 65 games one year, and it was him. Like I know they had Amare and they had Sean Marion running the wing, but like Steve made that thing go, and so I think you can make a definitive case for Nash there. I know you're fond of him too. And it's nothing against Dwayne, but it's just that. Dwayne's peak was basically, to me, 2008, 2009. It was after he came back from the injury. So it was towards the end of that decade. Obviously you had the 2006 finals in there. Nash doesn't have a moment like that. Nash was not the defender that Dwayne was. But Dwayne also, missed basically a whole season in 2007, 2008. To me, I would put it Nash first, Dwayne second, and then Iverson and Kidd somewhere in there.
Yeah. And again, this is one of those tricky things where what are we really evaluating? Are we evaluating their overall skill set and on both ends of the court? Are we arguing, impact, who defined the decade? Or are we arguing simply achievements like championships and MVPs? Because Dwayne's got the championship.
Yes.
Nash has the 2 MVPs.
Mm-hmm. And Kidd had it.
I've just got to decline a quick call here.
No problem.
Sorry. I didn't want the meats getting in there.
No, that's right. And did Kidd won an MVP, right? He won an MVP his first year in Jersey, did he not? Or was he second?
No, he didn't. He didn't actually win it, I don't think. I think Duncan won it that year.
That's right.
The year that we talked about Kidd, Duncan won it.
Yeah, that's right.
But still, Kidd revived a moribund Nets franchise and got them to 2 finals. This is one of those the NBA math questions. Do Kidd's 2 finals and losing them both times is that greater than or equal to Nash's 3 conference finals but no finals? At the end of the day, you both lost, right? You didn't win the championship, but the Suns made 3 conference finals with Nash. And in that D'Antoni period you're talking about, they go 62 wins, 54, 61, 55. And as you point out, best offense in the NBA, I think, probably throughout that stretch, helped revolutionize the game, made basketball fun again after a pretty, ghastly era of, isolation and, ball pounding and everything else that was going on in the league. And so Nash's impact on the era, beyond the MVPs, and just in terms of style of play and what those Suns teams helped revolutionize. Now you can say, well, it's because of D'Antoni. You could say it's because of Nash. You could say it's because of the whole collective with Stoudemire and Marion. However you want to parse it, I think you can make a very strong case, as you are, for Nash. But if you're doing let's draft the 2000s guards.
Right.
Are you taking Nash ahead of Wade or not? Like that becomes a matter of preference. That becomes a matter of, well, who else you've got on your team? It's a really interesting discussion. I think Nash and Wade are the two best options, as you point out, and I agree. I think AI and Kidd are next. Again, my personal bias, I probably lean Kidd because his combination of just passing genius and on-court leadership, the way he elevated teams, the way he elevated players, and plus his defense.
Yes.
I think, to me, if I'm drafting a guy, I'm taking Kidd over AI.
Yeah, I agree. I think Iverson's
in his prime.
I think Iverson's fourth. All right, we won't dwell on this too much, but the 2010s, LeBron and Durant at forward, Curry at guard, I think those are pretty standard. The other two, Harden at guard, Dwight at center. I feel like we're so far away from when Dwight mattered that I don't. Everybody's got clouded at this point, since he's played for every team in the Southeast Division but the Heat at this stage, or at least
they're the smart ones.
Well, right. Well, they weren't so smart at one point. There was a point they were trying to get him, but
everybody did. Yeah.
Well, right. That's true too, and he may be back in LA. Who knows? But Harden, I was trying to think of somebody else just because I have this bias. But I don't know that there is anybody else. Is there? I mean, at the guard spot, other than for the 2010s, is it James Harden, or could it be Russell Westbrook over James Harden? I mean,
well, the other strongest candidate based on the MVP and just his gaudy stats is Westbrook. Who, look, I regard Westbrook in kind of the same way I regard AI, and I don't have to repeat the reasons. It's pretty obvious. Westbrook's kind of a bigger version of him. And so Harden, it's definitely Harden over Westbrook. Whether it's Harden over anybody else, I mean, look, Harden's been in the MVP discussion, 3 straight years where he's been, or is it 4 straight years now where he's been at no worse than second, and won one in there. I think it's got to be Harden. I mean, there are the guys that are really, really good, but
Chris Paul get your attention at all for this?
He does. I think that, on the one hand, Chris has, excuse me, I got to decline this call again. On the one hand, Chris Paul has the defense that Harden doesn't play. He's more of a distributor. He helped revive a moribund Clippers team in much the same way that Jason Kidd once did with the Nets. Chris Paul should get a ton of credit, along with Blake Griffin, for making the Clippers respectable for the first time in their history. And, again, if we're talking impact, beyond just stats, beyond just skill set, if we're talking impact, the impact that Chris Paul made within the decade is pretty damn huge. On the other hand, Harden's made the Rockets, a contender, year in, year out. Okay, they haven't made the finals. I get it. It's, only one conference finals. I get it. But his impact on the game and the way we see the game and the way we see what a guard can do, just his own innovations, as much as people may hate his innovations in the way that he draws fouls and his 15 step backs, we can mock it all, but the guy has made an indelible impact. So that's a tough one. I probably lean Harden over Chris Paul a little bit, but I could easily talk myself into Chris Paul. And then, look, there's a bunch of other guys who are interesting, but I just don't think anybody elevates to that level.
Right. Well, if I was actually building this team, I would put LeBron at the point and replace Harden with Kawhi. That's what I would do. But that's
the funniest discussion of this summer was the LeBron's going to be the point guard for the Lakers, and I thought he's been the point guard for every team he's ever played for. Can we stop? I don't understand. All right, I'm going to sound like Jeff Van Gundy for a minute here, because Jeff Van Gundy is always not understanding things. So let me be Jeff Van Gundy for a minute. I don't understand how Ben Simmons comes into the league called a point guard at 6'10" because he has the ball in his hands, but LeBron comes in at 6'8" with the ball in his hands all the time and was not a point guard, and we called him a forward or a point forward. How is LeBron not the point guard on every team he's ever been on And don't tell me it was Mario Chalmers or Mo Williams.
Point guard, Rio Chalmers.
Point God.
Okay, you're on this podcast. Proper respect should be given. He was just in the big three. He was asked if he's the best shooter in that league, and of course he said yes. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Kyrie even is a combo. I mean, most guards are combo guards these days. So I mean, anybody LeBron was going to play with, that was going to be the case. But I'm with you. And as far as center with Dwight, I just don't know who else there is, honestly. Like, I'm Marc Gasol. There's just, Boogie for a little while, right? I mean, that looks like that might be over, but there's just not a lot of choice there. I mean, it's in terms of who you were going to go with. I mean, you had Chris Bosh had a turn at center for a little while, but it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of other great options. It's kind of Dwight by default. All right, we're going to get off of this. When we come back from the break, I want to get into the top 5 front offices in the NBA with Howard, and maybe I've set them up here and maybe I haven't. Another of the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I can attest to this personally because they just threw out my traffic ticket for me. It was no problem, no points on the license, no other details that I had to deal with. You've got to check out the law firm of Seltzer Mayberg. You can find them at onecalllegal.com. That's onecalllegal.com, or call 1-855-5000-LAW, 1-855-5000-LAW. They handle cases including but not limited to car accidents, slip and falls, and of course traffic tickets. And they've got a new 15,000 square foot office, which we work out of at times as well, on I-95 in North Miami. They handle cases from all over the state. They got a special now. If you mention 5 Reasons or 5 on the floor, they will take care of your traffic ticket for $49.95. Go check out that price somewhere else. You're not going to get it. Call now, 24/7 service for a free consultation. That's onecalllegal.com, 1-855-5000-LAW, Seltzer Mayberg. All right, right back here on 5 on the floor. All right, so Howard Beck covers the entire NBA. He has a perspective beyond South Florida. So I have not told him who to pick here. I just told him that we were going to talk about this. So part of this is what happened this offseason, but really want to look at it in totality, because I just think there's a lot of interesting stuff. You talk to a lot of executives around the NBA. You talk to a lot of agents who talk to a lot of executives. You talk to players who deal with executives. And I just think it's interesting how reputations of general managers and, presidents and all the rest change over time. Whereas you have like Danny Ainge was a genius, 2-3 years ago, and as he's building all these assets, and now you look at it this offseason, and you're like, okay, what did all those assets become? Maybe he's not as much of a genius anymore. I would like to get Howard Beck's top 5 front offices in the NBA right now.
Whew, man. So one, I hate you for doing this to me. On the other hand,
you're going to lose all of your contacts. You're going to lose all of your contacts. I'm going to take all of them. Yes. All your fault.
Yeah, they're all, every single GM is going to hate me after this. Well, maybe like 25 will hate me. But also thank you for doing this, because it made me really think about this. And like, I started trying to rank them, and I'm like, well, that's easy. I know who the top 5 are. And I start writing them, and the next thing I know, I had a list of like 9 or 10. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, all right, but wait, there's a few others here that I should probably, now I've got 15. Well, I know who I think I know who my bottom 5 are. So I really had to wrestle with this. And then I started thinking about, well, what are we talking about when we're ranking them? And it can't be prisoner of the moment. Well, just what happened this summer. It can't be, I'm thinking about it in terms of capability versus results, right? Mm-hmm. So let me put it this way. The last Heat championship was 6 years ago, right?
Right.
And the Heat won 2 championships in this decade. And Pat Riley is still Pat freaking Riley. And Andy Ellisberg is still a cap genius. And the same guys who brought together the super team are all still there. They haven't lost anything. They're not any less smart today, or less clever, or less shrewd, less visionary, or anything else. And Pat Riley is still Pat freaking Riley. So I don't want to, like, the Heat don't deserve to be, or that front office doesn't deserve to be dismissed in a discussion like this based on capability. But if we have to introduce results, right? Because if we just say that the Spurs are always there because RC and Pop are great and they won 5 championships over 15 years, if we just say Riley's always there, well, then we're giving them a pass over the actual results. You have to have the results. It would be just like the years where, like, LeBron's team underachieves, and you go, well, he's still the best player in the game, but he didn't have the championship at the end. So, it's the same thing. We don't just give like the superstars the automatic. We still need to see the results when we're talking about like the MVP race, whatever it may be. And otherwise LeBron would have won a few more MVPs, right? And again, this is not to say that Pat Riley took a month off in the middle of the season,
Right.
as LeBron sometimes did defensively. So there's all my prelude. I do not have the Heat in the top 5.
Mm-hmm.
My top 5 in no particular order at the moment. And again, my next 5 are all really close. The Clippers are in there, the Warriors, the Raptors. I still have Danny Ainge and the Celtics there, and I've got the Rockets there. That would be my top 5 right now. Okay. Do you want to hear my next 5, or do you want to make me explain my top 5?
No. Do the next 5 real quick, and then I just wrote down your top 5, so we'll go through those. But yes, give me the next 5.
The next 5 are in no particular order: Oklahoma, Utah, Denver, San Antonio still in there, and Brooklyn.
Gotcha.
And again, what I'm looking at is not just whether I think teams are capable, whether these front offices, the GMs, the owners who have to support and supply the resources for those GMs and empower those GMs. It's not just about that. It's also about what did they accomplish. And like front offices, this is one other quick note. Executive of the Year, is I think one of the weirdest awards that the NBA does, and we the media don't vote on that one. The other executives do, which makes it even more weird because they all have biases for and against each other, and they're picking it. But executive
wait. How are like the year that Gar Forman tied Pat Riley after the Heat acquired LeBron freaking James?
Hey, come on,
Chris Bosh?
Gar Forman got Carlos Boozer. That's
right.
man.
How could I forget? Yes. I know.
Credit where it's due.
He's still trying to join
that
the
was
Heat,
a year.
By the way. He's been trying for 20 years. Go on. Continue.
That was a year where the weirdness of the Executive of the Year voting came into play. But the other weird thing about it is that teams are not made in one summer. I mean, sometimes they are. It was in 2010. And it maybe was sort of even with the Clippers and Nets this past summer. But Executive of the Year is more of a rolling, or evaluating an executive needs to be a rolling 3, 4, 5, 6 year thing, right? It's what you do over a certain time span, because sometimes you're setting up your next moves. Sometimes it's about the cumulative impact of multiple drafts or multiple free agent periods. You just can't. It's never one summer. Even though we'll talk about the Clippers, how this was a transformative summer for them in 2019, it was really the work they did over the last 2-3 years, especially the last 2, the Blake Griffin trade, what that led to, and then the Tobias Harris trade and what that led to, and picking Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and, acquiring Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell in the Chris Paul deal. Like, they did so much other stuff to build to the point where Kawhi Leonard and Paul George could say, that's where I want to be. And it's all of that buildup that is why I'm not giving the Clippers this based on recency bias. It's not because of what they did 3 weeks ago or whatever it's been, 4 weeks ago. It's because of everything they did to put themselves in a position to get that, and a lot of the guys who are still there to support those 2 stars. So that's how I'm looking at this. But so just to be real clear, it's not about right now today. It's about a 3 to 6 year span or whatever of everything that you've done to put yourself in a position and how those results played out.
All right, so I'm going to challenge you on your top 5 a little bit. Okay.
Right.
I am with you on the Clippers. And as you said, even with the Heat, 2010, like you said, that was a 3-year plan, basically. I mean, where they decided not to basically. So I'm with you on the rolling part of this, because I mean, they decided, we're not going to give Dwayne, try to get a second star for Dwayne now. I mean, they did a couple things, the Jermaine O'Neal deal, the Sean Marion thing, but like for the most part, like it was, we're going to kind of gut this thing for 2010, stay competitive, and then we'll gut it, clear the decks, and try to make the move there. So it is always a rolling thing. I'm going to give you the Clippers, and it's not just what they've done lately. It's just Jerry West is in the front office. Like I'm sorry. Like that's, I mean, we say we're not going to give recency bias or just give like a lifetime achievement award either. Okay. He deserves both. Like it's Jerry freaking West. Like yes. Okay. I mean, he's the one guy, like if he calls you as another NBA GM, hang up. Okay. Decline the call. Do what Howard's done twice here. Hang up. Okay. And not only that, but you've also got Doc, you've got Lawrence. I mean, you have a combination of Ballmer who'll spend I mean, it's just an impressive room. Like, it's why
Michael Winger, Trent Redden.
It's a great group. I mean, to me, the Clippers are in there. The Raptors are in there for sure. What Masai did. I mean, he took the ultimate risk a general manager can take, which is we're going to go for it now. And it paid off. And so to me, he's minted for life. Like, I mean, whatever happens now. And he ends up getting a guy in Siakam in the draft who now he can actually move forward with a competitive team after, the second part of this, which was trying to keep Kawhi, which was never likely. But after that didn't end up working out, but now he has somebody else to build around. So to me, the Clippers and the Raptors are definitely in there. Okay. Now the Warriors, yes and no. Okay, for me. Yes, because Bob Myers certainly deserves that. And Jerry West was a big part of this before, too, which is why Klay Thompson's still there instead of who could have been Kevin Love or somebody else from all those years ago. But I don't think the Warriors have done a fantastic job here over the past couple of years refreshing this thing. I mean, they haven't developed players. The Heat were guilty of this, too, towards the end of the LeBron era, but they haven't really developed good rotation players as just sort of, to help out their core. I don't think they handled the Durant thing particularly well. Boogie was a worthwhile risk. Obviously they've re-signed Draymond. I would keep them in the top 5, but they, to me, I don't know. I want to see it. Like this D'Angelo Russell move to me, are they going to keep him? Are they going to flip him? How does he fit? I don't know. I mean, they had to give away draft picks to give up their heart and one. In my view, Draymond's one too, but their other heart and soul player in Iguodala. I don't think they've managed it particularly well. Now these things are impossible to manage. We saw it with the Heat. We've seen it with pretty much every mini dynasty or dynasty. I mean, they're really difficult to manage. But I just don't. They haven't been perfect lately. I'll just put it that way. I don't know that you can be, but I would keep them in the top 5. But they might slip out. Your other two, I'm gonna challenge these. And I might look at some in your second 5. Look, let's start with Danny. All right. You have to be able to build the assets to be accused of squandering the assets. So I'm going to give him credit for getting all the stuff he got and for fleecing Brooklyn at the end of Pierce and Garnett's careers and all the other trades that he made. But the reality is, okay, and for drafting Tatum, okay, and picking up the extra draft pick, and there's a lot there that's positive, right, instead of taking Fultz or whatever. But, if you look at some of the picks, it hasn't worked out so great. They've mismanaged things internally where guys haven't wanted to stay. And somehow they had all of those assets. The picks that they got didn't turn out to be what we thought they would be necessarily, but they don't have a lot of great players from it or great potential players. And, I mean, they pretty much just had to sort of overpay Kemba Walker to do what Kyrie was doing, at, in my view, a higher level. I don't know, man. Is the shine still on Danny for you? Because for me, it's a little bit off.
So it's certainly a more complicated picture than it was a couple of years ago, where people would have hands down, no one would have disputed that they were in the top 5, right? That Danny was the top 5 GM.
No question. Right. Top 3, yeah, right. No question.
Right. So we look at it differently now because of some of the results that have followed, and that's fair. As I just said, it's not about capability. It's about results, or it's about both, really. So let's talk about the results first, though. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are two of the more important players, I would say, on this, I guess, slightly watered down version of Team USA right now.
Slightly watered down. It's like somebody just poured like a whole bottle of vodka in it. It's not slightly. I mean, okay. I don't know I don't know if that team makes the conference finals, but anyway, that's another question. But they'll probably win gold in China in a few weeks. And we will see, just how capable those two guys are. And Jason Tatum, a year ago at this time, we were talking about as, ready to bust out perennial all-star. And then this past year was a little bit of a step back. It was a little bit of a step back for Jaylen Brown as well. But I don't think anybody around the league would dispute that these are two really promising, very talented, still growing, still young players who fit today's game very well because of their versatility and their size and length. And so at a minimum,
Danny, drafted those two. Now, there are a bunch of draft misses, including some of those early Nets picks. I think like James Young was one of those, right? So I've always said this, and I will always say this about when we were evaluating front offices and the draft. Whether you're drafting high, whether you're drafting low, wherever you cannot evaluate any team based on some sort of like standard of a perfect record. There are no perfect records. Even Jerry West, the great Jerry West, had a bunch of misses. Okay, I was there for Corey Hightower and Mark Madsen and some other gaffes along the way.
Yeah, but Mark Madsen could dance though, man. Like you got to give Mark. I mean, you're not taking that into account.
Everybody has their misses. Also, I wasn't a big fan of the Eddie Jones and Eldon Campbell for Glenn Rice deal, even though they did win a championship with Glenn Rice. Anyway, everybody has their misses, and Danny had some misses, but it's like the same thing that people do with the whole Sixers thing. Well, the process wasn't all that great. What about that Okafor pick? I don't care about the Okafor pick. The whole point of the process was to get as many bites of the apple as you could, knowing that the draft is a crapshoot, and you're always going to have some misses. So the more chances you've got to draft high talent high in the draft, the better off you are. They got Embiid and Simmons. Ergo, process was a success. Danny got himself a bunch of picks, used some, traded some. Did they all work out? No. He got Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. Rozier was a very good player for them and was critical in them getting to the conference finals in 2018. So they didn't like screw it up. Now, trading for Kyrie, it's such a mixed bag. Isaiah Thomas was damaged goods, and maybe they knew that better than anybody. And so, on talent, they made a great trade. We can see based on now the last 2 years that on chemistry, there was a risk that kind of backfired on them. On the other hand, every team in the league would have traded for Kyrie probably.
Yes.
Despite all these concerns about him and his personality, his playing style sometimes, everybody shared those around the league, and every single team around the league probably would have traded for him anyway because he's that talented. So I'm not going to hold that against him. And then it blew up on them. I mean, sometimes you take a swing and it just doesn't work out. And I can't fault them for the swing. Al Horford decided to go, but that was also because I think the Celtics didn't want to pay Al Horford $100 million over whatever it was, 3-4 years, because of his age and his recent injury history. Again, a reasonable decision. And also part of what has held them back the last 2 seasons that gets overlooked all the time, they got Gordon Hayward. That was a great coup to steal Gordon Hayward in free agency or to lure him in free agency. And then Gordon Hayward snapped his leg. And like, again, you can't account for that. So they have gotten great draft picks, great free agents. Also, by the way, they traded out of the Markelle Fultz spot to get Jason Tatum.
Right.
And another pick with it.
Right. They got an extra first.
Right.
No, he's done some really smart things. I'm just looking at the end product here, I guess. And I'm just saying.
All right, they're a contender, are they not? They're not.
They are, I think. They're not as good as the other two, the two best teams.
They're in that, right. But they're legitimately in the top 4, and a break or two goes their way. They're a viable conference finals team. I think that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are going to be better without Kyrie there. I think Kemba will be the better fit. Yes, the Kemba deal is probably a little bit of an overpay given his age, but I think as much as it's easy to kind of chip away at the Celtics right now and Danny's the job he's done, I think this season's actually going to be eye-opening, where we're going to see that some of these players that people got a little bit unsure of, specifically Tatum, most importantly Tatum, we may see a much different version of, and it'll cause people to reevaluate once again.
All right, well, let's look at your other one, and I'm definitely going to challenge you on this one. And I it's not that I don't respect Daryl Morey and what they've done down there, but I feel like lately it's just, with them it's kind of, and they got out of the Chris Paul contract, but they had to take the Russell Westbrook contract to do it. I feel like everything with them is kind of operating from a deficit these days with them. It's just like one desperation move after another that gets them deeper in a hole. Now, if they end up getting to the finals finally, then it looks worth it. And look, Daryl Morey was the guy who identified James Harden as a guy that you wanted to pay. All right, and he was right. Okay, whatever people think of Harden, he was right. That trade was a steal. The Chris Paul trade, they gave up more, I think, than people thought they did at the time, because Harrell's turned out to be a pretty good player, and obviously Lou has been very helpful to the Clippers, and probably could still be helpful to Houston. But I don't. I mean, to me, just giving Chris Paul that contract I was like, what? Like, seriously? At his age, with his injury history, with what the last 2 years are they going to look like? And so from then, it was like, okay, how do we get out of that? All right, we're going to get a slightly, worse deal in Westbrook and see if this chemistry experiment's going to work with Harden again. I look at some of the teams you've got in your second group, and this is not even including, like I said, some of the perennials like the Heat, which I'm not going to make an argument. It's hard for me. I believe that the Heat had a very good offseason. I think they've gotten back on track. It's hard for me to make an argument for the Heat when, they paid James Johnson what they paid James Johnson, and they gave Dion Waiters 4 years. And I don't want to revisit all that because Heat fans are tired of me doing it, but it took some of the luster off, no question. I think they've gotten back on track. I think what they did this offseason, they made a bunch of smart moves in my view, and I think they're going to win 47, 48 games this year, which people disagree with me, but I think they're going to be good, and I think they're positioning themselves. But I look at these other, and the thing that your second group all have in common is that with the exception of Brooklyn, which I kind of considered a small market, not even though they're a huge market because they're the second team in town, your other four, OKC, Utah, Denver, and San Antonio, are small market teams, basically, right? I mean, Denver, we can make an argument, but Utah, OKC, San Antonio for sure. And they have less to work with than Houston does, just in terms of, and I would put any of those four right now ahead of the Rockets, honestly. I think what Utah has done there, what Dennis Lindsey has done there, I mean, look at that roster he's put together, okay, in Utah.
Yeah.
Like, right, and after losing Gordon Hayward, like, they did everything they could to keep him. He was their star. What do? They draft Mitchell, great move. Okay, they locked up Gobert, and every move that they made since, to me, it has made sense. And I just think it's impossible to do it in a place like that. I mean, Presti, I think did a masterful job working out of a no-win situation this year. Denver's been terrific since Connolly's got there. Every move that they've made, the Millsap move you can argue with a little bit, but like everything else they've done has made sense. And, of course, the Spurs are the Spurs. Why would you still put Houston over, like, those four? And look, and Brooklyn, Sean Marks is a genius in my eyes. What he's done the last 2 years, you're close to it up there. So I might look at any of those five teams and say I'd put them ahead of the Rockets right now.
So the Rockets, it's interesting. So let me go back to something you said earlier about the Warriors. The Warriors are still in there for me without, like, all of your quibbles about them or the caveats or whatever, all fair. The reason the Warriors are still there anyway is the obvious. They won 3 championships. They went to 5 straight finals. And a lot of that had to do with who they had drafted. Some of that predates all of this front office. Keeping the right guys, not trading Clay for Kevin Love, but then also getting KD. So you get KD and you go to 3 more finals and you win 2 more championships. Like that just negates everything else. You missed on draft picks. Yeah, that blows. You'd be that much better off if you had nailed a couple. But drafting low perennially is hard, as you've seen down there in Miami. So yeah, the longer you're great, the harder it is to get good talent in the door. They've missed on free agent pickups too. Boogie was, a reasonable gamble, all that. But the 3 championships, the results, the 5 straight finals, just and getting KD, which was one of the greatest coups in NBA free agency history for a team of that ability to still find a way to add a player of that stature is incredible. So it just negates everything else. The Rockets, the principle is somewhat the same but different results. They identified James Harden as a player who could be a franchise star and one of the greatest players in the league. Now, today, everybody says, well, duh. But, folks, like, there's so much revisionist history on this. If you go back to the time of the Harden trade, nobody thought at the time, oh, they ripped off the Thunder and James Harden's going to be a perennial MVP candidate. He was a 6th man. And he was a 6th man who had just come off a horrendous finals against the Heat. And it's not as though the whole league knew this. If everybody was that if it was that obvious that James Harden was going to become this guy, everyone would have been knocking down Sam Presti's door and making bigger, better offers. So they identified him. But it was also, again, the homework. So what did the Clippers do to get to Kawhi and Paul George wanting to be there? Well, they made all these other smart, smaller moves. What the Rockets did for years, Daryl constantly nailed low first and second round picks and free agent guys. It was always like the Chuck Hayeses and those kind of guys. And he did it again with Clint Capella, who was 25th overall pick. And Clint Capella's been their 3rd most important player after Harden and Paul the last couple of years. They got PJ Tucker. they got and then lost Trevor Ariza for cost reasons, and part of that is the shift in ownership changed up, I think, some of the math there, or some of the willingness to spend. But it was a really smart move when they got Tucker and Ariza and kind of rounded out their defense, became a really solid team, hiring Mike D'Antoni, who was the perfect match for Harden at that time. So it's about all of these other things and having Harden to build around. Now, to your point, it does feel like some of these moves in the last few years have been these big desperation swings. And the reason for that is if you're, pretty much capped out and you've got a guy like James Harden, it is your absolute responsibility, your burden, your duty, your obligation to get him that second star. And so Daryl, like any GM, analytics or no, everybody knows you need top 5, top 10, top 20 at the minimum talent, or a couple of those guys to win. So you can only go for the guys who are available. So he took all those swings at Dwight Howard. He took all those swings at Carmelo Anthony when Carmelo was still in his prime. He got Chris Paul because that was the guy he could get. He got Dwight because that was the guy he could get. And then, the Dwight thing soured as it sours everywhere Dwight goes. He got Chris Paul because that was the guy he could get. And when he made that deal, cap violations aside, I think it was understood that if you were trading for him, with him opting in, you were going to have to pay him at the end of that 1 year that he just opted into. So it locked them in. And yeah, that contract was awful. And yeah, they just traded it for one of the other, toughest contracts in the league in Westbrook. And yeah, I'm very much a skeptic about Westbrook Harden as a 1-2 punch. Daryl, of course, has told me I'm absolutely spectacularly wrong. We'll see. But I'm skeptical. But nevertheless, he did it again. He just united two of the most recent MVPs. I don't know if it's going to work, but it takes a lot, and it takes a lot of just fortitude to make those kind of moves in the first place. They've been bold, they've been aggressive, they've been creative, they've drafted well, often in lower positions. Those are all important things, and they're a team that we have talked about as a contender for multiple years running.
All fair. I'm with you on the Harden Westbrook thing. I mean, I think it's going to work. I just don't think it's going to work when it matters. In other words, they're not going to be bad. Okay, they're going to win in the 50s. No. But I
think it's problematic.
I think it's I think when push comes to shove in a game 6, game 7 of a series against a team that's sort of better united, I think they're going to have difficulty. And that's why, again, I think what's fascinating about this season is you've got these mini super teams in the West, whether it's Houston, the Clippers, the Lakers. And then you have two teams that I think are going to be better connected in Utah and Denver that I think ultimately may be the teams that rise, above them, even though maybe they don't have as many household names as these other teams. So this is going to be one of the more compelling seasons we've seen. I understand what you're saying about Daryl and all that stuff. I do feel maybe it's just because it's become such a joke. It's like any time there's a player who's slightly available. I mean, it happens here too with Pat, to be honest. But anytime, but the difference is Daryl's seems to be out there bragging about it to reporters, whereas the Heat don't talk. Okay, so it's just there's a guy out there. Okay, Houston to Miami, and it's like, oh shit, that James Johnson contract that really fucked us. That's been the consistent theme here. All right, so we've got your list. I'm going to make you do one more thing before you go. You said it was easy to compile your bottom 5. I don't want all 5. Just give me 30. Give me 30. Who's 30? Who's 30?
Who's 30? I'm gonna let the guys in my backyard off the hook, and I'm gonna give it to Phoenix.
Okay.
I'm gonna give it to Phoenix. And listen, for some of these too, again, thank you and damn you for making me do this exercise. But as I thought about these, some of it was well, how do we evaluate guys who've only been in the seat for a couple of years? Kobe Altman takes over for Griffin Cleveland. Right. He's had a couple of years of just cleanup work to do. How do we properly evaluate that? Is that even fair to him? Detroit, those guys just got there a couple of years ago trying to clean up a big cap mess there. And Phoenix, it's yet another new group. But Phoenix is weighed down by the fact that their owner, Robert Sarver, has been a massive impediment for them. He's difficult to work for. He has made a lot of kind of cost-saving moves that have screwed them. He's often just hired the wrong people. His meddling has gotten them in a lot of trouble.
But isn't that the common theme though? Because if you're looking at it's ownership mostly, because if you look at let's look at the teams that are typically perceived to be at the bottom, right? Phoenix, You mentioned Cleveland if LeBron's not there, right? And I have a personal relationship with Kobe. I've got a personal relationship with James Jones. So it's like, it's like they're smart guys, okay? But it's just, what do you do with ownership there? I think, and you maybe speak to, I think Scott Perry's a smart guy, but like, what do you do with that ownership in New York? So to me, those three organizations, and then Sacramento also, where I think they've turned things around a little bit, but there's some questions there about how that thing is run. I guess sometimes in order for front office to be good, you have to have stable ownership, right? I mean, that's
Yes.
the major thing here, and the teams you're talking about don't. That's the
best, right? The best owners hire the right people, empower them without meddling. Are engaged without being disruptive. So you can't be completely hands-off. If you're Mikhail Prokhorov, you were probably too hands-off. Or if you were Robert Pera in Memphis, who's just never even there. It can be, so there's a happy medium there somewhere between hands-off and meddling. And you need to hire the right people, empower them, be engaged without being meddling, spend smartly, of course. And so what happens in a place like Phoenix is Sarver doesn't spend, and especially when he really needed to, when they were good, and traded away guys, traded away picks to offload contracts, all this kind of stuff during their best period. And then on top of that, he has been meddling, and he has been one of those guys who thinks he knows more than his GM does, and he often hasn't even hired the right GM. So when I say that they're 30th, that's not a shot at James Jones. But look, they didn't exactly vindicate themselves real well with this past draft night and everything they did there. So it's tough, but right now, largely on the basis of the instability over the last several years and on their owner, not so much the GM, I think I would put them there. But, the Knicks could be in that 30th slot all the time. And given how badly they struck out this summer after trading away their franchise star just to offload contracts and then made all this noise about we're going to get guys want to come here, and there's this backlash from some part of the Knicks fandom where it's like, well, it's your guys' fault in the media for raising hopes. Like, no, we're taking our cues from your team and from the owner in the front office who were telegraphing this not just to us but to the entire league, and they missed for good reason. And so they would be a very deserving choice for that as well. I think that they did enough in terms of let's just grab a bunch of solid players at reasonable prices that I'm going to give them a break for the moment. But I don't think they're significantly. They're going to be significantly better competitively on the court, right? They're going to win more games, but that's a low bar. They won 17 games. They're going to win more games, but they're going to top out somewhere in the mid to high 20s probably. And I don't see they didn't sign a bunch of players who are now going to be the core of a future perennial contender. They signed a bunch of guys. Yeah. I still don't see a guy who's going to be their franchise star. I don't think it's Dennis Smith Jr. I don't think it's Kevin Knox. I don't know if it's going to be RJ Barrett. But I don't know what the plan is. And if you've gone this far and it's still hard for us to see, well, what's the long-term plan? What's the vision? Then that's a problem. And so, again, the Knicks would be a deserving choice there as well.
Yeah, I think just about every year. Well, actually, it's funny. It's basically the owner you described is the one we have here. So I think he's involved without meddling. The only question with Mickey sometimes comes down to luxury tax and whether he wants to spend it or not. And that's been an issue at times. I think their philosophy on it is if the team is worth it, they'll spend it. If the team is not, it's not worth them getting themselves in a repeater situation. And I think that actually proved to be smart. I mean, people didn't like it when they dumped Rodney McGruder on the last day of the season, but it got them out of a tax situation. And now, it created themselves a little bit of flexibility. So, we'll talk to Howard again, maybe next year. We'll see if the Heat end up winning 48-50 and get Bradley Beal, and I can do a wat to Candace Buckner in January or February. We'll have you back. What would you put, before I let you go, what would you put the odds of Bradley Beal being traded before February?
I think it's at least 50-50. I think that, it's not the kind of thing that Tommy Shepard's going to be doing on day one or month one after, inheriting that job, after being hired to replace Ernie Grunfeld. But listen, that team is stuck. they're absolutely stuck because of John Wall's contract and because of just their whole general situation there. Bradley Beal, at some point, he's already, he hasn't rejected the extension, but he hasn't accepted it either. I think that that's a warning sign. I think that the murmurings for at least the last year or two have been Bradley Beal's eventually going to want out because things are not all rosy with John Wall, and that was before John Wall went down. And now with John Wall, recovering from an incredibly difficult injury and having a max deal that was already considered an albatross contract even before he got hurt, if you're Bradley Beal, how can you want to stay there? Like, how can you possibly see a competitive, viable, rewarding future there, given the situation? I think to me, this is not, I'm not trying to tell you I know what Bradley Beal is thinking. I'm just saying the most logical thing, and especially in today's NBA where stars move all the time and where they often are now prioritizing winning in the right situation, playing with the right guys over all kinds of other considerations, whether it's pay, whether it's city, whether it's whatever. It would, to me, defy logic and all current trends for Bradley Beal to just say, yeah, this is fine. Give me the max extension and I'll stick it out and we'll see where it goes. Listen, I have all faith in the world that Tommy Shepard can turn this around, but he's dealing with a very difficult hand. And I don't know that Bradley Beal or anybody else in that situation, a star in their prime, would want to take that leap of faith because it's going to take time. It may take too much time. So maybe it's even 60-40 in favor of Beal being traded. But, all due respect to Candace, who I love, I think Beal's eventually on the move. I don't know where he's going. I don't know if that's Miami, but I think I'll put it this way. I'll be surprised if Bradley Beal's still a Wizard a year from now.
All right. I'm going to send this to Candace right after we get off. So,
absolutely.
All right, Howard, thanks for doing it. Follow him at Howard Beck. Follow his work on Bleacher Report once he gets back from his well-deserved vacation, and hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Awesome. Been a pleasure, Ethan. Thanks for having me.